Hi, everyone. Yeah, my talk is called, is that the clicker? I'm sorry. Wonderful. So $1 billion for open source maintainers. I could probably have called it 1 billion euros here. I live in Switzerland, so we do Swiss francs anyway. And not only is it $1 billion, it's actually $1 billion per year. Right, so this sounds like a crazy amount of money, and I'm going to sort of make the argument that actually it isn't. But before going into this, just some few words about me. So my name is Tobie Langel. I got into tech kind of by accident. I was actually a professional jazz drummer, which is not really a profession in hindsight. I moved to sort of open source development and then consulting. I run a small consulting firm, UnlockOpen, and I'm wearing today the same consultant outfit as Christian did before me: white shirt, jeans, glasses, and a 3-day beard. So this is how you can sort of spot us in the wild. And I've been talking about the question of sustainability in supply chain security for like a very long time at this point, and now it's like kind of, everyone's talking about it, but I think it's something that's important as something that we should look at as a community, not only from a security perspective. So I really believe that to think about funding open source, we need a real mindset shift, and this is kind of like the purpose of this talk, is to get that mindset shift started. And for this, I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about money. I'm going to talk about the fact that maintenance is not the same thing as innovation. So there's a reason I say $1 billion for open source maintenance and not just $1 billion for open source. Then I'm going to talk about professionalizing maintenance. I'm actually not going to get too much in the details of who's going to pay for this. I think we can have this conversation tomorrow in the debate that I'm actually going to be hosting. So please come tomorrow with questions and thoughts about how to actually find $1 billion per year. And also I do, like, there's this, small point here is every project is different. Like, I believe this is a model, and like this thought, this sort of framework is a model that's going to work for some projects, but obviously not for all of them. Okay, so let's start by talking about money. I think we never talk enough about money in open source in general, and in just the world in general. Money runs on lots of things, and by ignoring it, we let others actually take care of it. So, I said $1 billion actually, like, it's a lot of money, but really is it? And so, I'm going to make the case, and we're going to do the math together to show why it's actually not that much. Do you know how many developers there are in the world?
25 million.
Yeah, that's a number I've heard. Any other numbers? So there's lots of data, different data points ranging from roughly 10 to roughly 30, depending on what you count. I picked this one from IDC, which is 16 million pro developers worldwide in 2022, right? But, anything from 10 to 30 is roughly correct.
25 million are GitHub users active.
Sorry, what?
GitHub users.
Yeah, sure. So do you know roughly how much a developer is paid worldwide? Like, any ideas about this? So sort of like an average developer salary? So I went with this. Right, this is like something from Statista 2024. It really depends on the country. Obviously, if you're in Silicon Valley, you're going to make a lot more money than this. If you somewhere else in the globe, you might make like significantly less. And also, it's important to consider that those are sort of like net salaries for developers, not loaded. If you start adding like tax and actually a computer in office, training, management, blah blah blah, like the number can come close to double this. Regardless, right? If you multiply 16 million by 65K, which is the sort of like what was the mean of the number I had before, this gives you roughly $1 trillion, right? Which is a huge amount of money. If you do a pile of $100 bills, it's skyscraper, right? It's really, really big. And now if you take 0.1% of a trillion, this sounds like basic math, but that is 1 billion, right? So $1 billion a year is literally 0.1% of a conservative back-of-the-envelope calculation of how much we collectively in the world spend on software engineering every year. So, each of these small, aggressively purple squares is actually $1 billion, right? And this is roughly what we spend every year. And, down there, you have $1 billion for open source, right? Now, if we look at, different numbers of how much of an application is actually open source, right? It depends, but you get numbers which are roughly between 60 and 90, right? This is the data from the Synopsys OSRA report. It says 76%. Again, those are like numbers, it's back of the envelope math, right? The point I'm trying to make is this, right? We're spending on one side $1 trillion a year on software development. 76% of the software that we actually rely on is open source. And when I talk about 1 billion, I'm sure that when you saw the title, $1 billion, you're just like, oh my God, this is so much money, this is ridiculous, this is absurd, right? And so I just think that, when you frame it that way, like it doesn't look that much anymore, does it? Right? So I think that's kind of like the first thing I want to say is we have to start thinking about running this open source ecosystem in a way that is, matches sort of like the reality of how much it is used and how much it actually brings value to the world. All right. So, second thing. I can see that I'm going to have to accelerate a bit here. Maintenance. So, of course, I hear you all think, oh my God, money is going to kill open source, right? And this is an entirely reasonable position to have. And actually, I've actually advocated that position in the past, right? I think it's like bringing money into open source is challenging. And there are people that more famous than I that did it in lots of different reasons in the past. And so this is DHH from Ruby on Rails here saying essentially the value of open source is that people come together to build open source software in a way that solves their direct problem with no intent of directly monetizing that software. It's this collaborative effort of scratching your own itch and fixing your own problems. And I think we have to acknowledge that this collaborative way of working is an incredible innovation engine, right? A lot of the set stack that we use has been built that way, and that's incredibly valuable. And we want to be really careful if we start funding open source maintenance, not to ruin this by putting money in the right places or creating wrong incentives. And I think, this is a really important point, is maintenance is not innovation. There's a very big difference between creating software and then keeping it up to date and doing a lot of the work of maintaining the software. The way open source maintenance works today, right, is like this, right? This is a sort of jab to the XKCD comic on 15 standards. You have 14 standards, and then you want to create one to unify them all, and you have 15. Well, we kind of do something similar for open source, right? A lot of open source developers who are maintaining software, they have all of these features, they're trying to maintain it, they're trying to get money. Some corporation comes up, gives them 10K or some amount of money to build this new feature, and they're like, oh, well, we really need this money to pay for the release pipeline or something like this, but we're going to use it to build, we're going to use it and build this new feature, right? And this is, of course, not sustainable, because what happens, right? You're burnt out and you have more features to maintain than you had before. And this is kind of like an industry problem, right? We suffer from featureitis or shiny object syndrome as not only in the open source community, but even in our industry is we always we value what's new, and we never focus on all of the underlying infrastructure that supports it. And one way of starting to think about this differently is to look at project lifecycle. And roughly kind of all projects, they kind of follow a similar cycle, which is there's some initial development, then there's growth, then there's maturity where it's stabilized, and then there's like some form of sunsetting where the technology like either becomes obsolete or really doesn't become relevant that much. And what's interesting in the way to sort of make a distinction between software development and maintenance is there's a lot of development that goes on at the beginning, and then it sort of like morphs into a lot more maintenance. And if you look at how projects are run, this doesn't affect only development versus maintenance. It affects a lot of different things, right? From a governance perspective, a lot of projects start being really driven by a BDFL, one person. And as they grow and become relied upon by the broader community, they move into more open governance models. For those of you who are familiar with Wordley maps, Simon Wordley talks about this shift from the components that we use from Genesis to custom built to product to commodity, right? And he also describes that the same kind of product management theories apply well for different levels, different parts of this life cycle, right? So lean or agile will be more initial development phases, and when you have something that's very low in the stack that everyone relies on, you might go into much more heavy-handed, process-oriented maintenance strategies like Six Sigma. Of course, that's an exaggeration for open source, but you get the idea, right? Similarly, the metaphor around pioneers, settlers, town planners goes along the same thing. Craft industrialization, right? A lot of people who are building open source projects when they start off, it feels very crafty. It's all about like what you do, finding cool solutions, etc. And the more a project matures, the more you get into industrialization, right? You organize, you have processes, you have like everything slows down because there are more risk and there are more is at stake. Similarly, hard skills, soft skills. Initial phase is all about like how good you are in engineering. If you go into a large project, it's all about how good you are at getting other people to agree with you, right? It's entirely different. And again, maker's schedule, manager's schedule. So we really have a lot of these transitions. They exist. We just aren't really acknowledging them or paying attention to them. And so essentially what I'm saying is, well, we have the open source way for the innovation part, right? The beginnings of the life cycle. What about when things become mature, when we're past the growth stage, and when software sort of like sediments into the stack where it becomes critical infrastructure, everyone relies on it, it's no longer shiny. How do we manage this? And my suggestion is to manage this, we have to professionalize maintenance. What would this look like? Well, to think about what would this look like, let's look at how we're thinking about open source today, right? So today we're kind of like, oh, nothing's funded, and then we have these dev maintainers, like unicorn dev maintainers, who are volunteers, right? And this is kind of like when you think sort of like the romantic image that we have of open source. This is not what today actually is, right? Today we have like all of the support staff behind us that are making lots of these projects possible, right? You have infrastructure, you have community management, you have marketing, research, events, all of these stuff that you will find in foundations, that you will find in single vendor projects that are provided and is supporting the work. And all of these are jobs, right? These folks are paid for this stuff. So the mindset shift here is like, let's split this dev maintainer unicorn into these two different things. We have the maintainer on one end, right, and the developer on the other. And I know, I mean, this is not like a clear-cut thing. It's not black and white. Absolutely, it depends on the project, many things, right? But this is like, the shift is in sort of like the mental mindset of like changing the way we think about this. And once we do this, we can essentially move the border of what is funded and what isn't, right? In a way that both supports the maintenance of open source and, leaves alone and protects the open source innovation engine that is based on volunteer work from lots of different organizations and lots of different people. So just to sort of frame this, $1 billion a year is enough to hire 10,000 maintainers. That is a lot of people that could be supporting maintenance of open source. I mean, even 1,000 paid maintainers would be incredible, right? So how would that actually work in practice? Well, one of the ways that I'm thinking about this is we can have legal entities that would actually employ those maintainers, right? These could be existing open source foundations, that there are certain legal requirements that might make it challenging in some areas. It could be existing fiscal hosts, such as Open Collective Foundation and funding platforms. It could be new entities entirely focused on maintenance. Those could be not-for-profit or for-profit, actually. There's some interesting things going on in the CRA in Europe around the notion of open source stewards. It's interesting whether or not this could sort of be a vehicle for this, and any kind of combination of the above. So here's a graph that I did very early this morning, very late last night, depending on how you want to think about it, to give you a sort of a picture of what it would look like, right? You have on the left sort of like the combination of private funding and public funding. It moves to FOSS foundations, fiscal hosts, so these new maintainer organizations. Those actually hire maintainers, manage them, right? And either pay them directly or go through payroll companies, for example, if they're abroad. And you can imagine that those maintainers would maintain a single project or would actually do fractional maintenance of many smaller projects. From a team organization, what would this look like? Well, you could actually build dedicated practices of maintenance, right? Right now, every sort of project is doing their own thing, and it's like very ad hoc the way we know how to maintain projects. You could imagine professionalizing this, right? You can imagine training around these aspects, including security issues. This could become a real career path, right? You could have proper management to support open source maintainers. Again, you could have fractional maintenance for smaller projects, and you could also share resources across project, right? Same infrastructure, for example, or same processes. And of course, the focus of those organizations would be really on the maintenance, not on the development of new features. So security and support training, tooling and infrastructure, bug triaging, release engineering, documentation compliance. And for the maintainers themselves, what would be interesting here is it could give part-time opportunities to people who don't want to be working full-time for large tech organizations, but who do want some stable revenue. Proper management support that would help with mental health and burnout issues that we see a lot in the ecosystem. Proper healthcare for countries that actually don't have this if you're not employed. Better separation of when you're actually doing maintenance work for a project and when you're doing the fun part of like building new features, right? And essentially enabling maintainers to fund the development of new features on their own time if they want to because they're paid, and not do the really bizarre thing that we're doing right now that I had the slide earlier on, which is that we're funding maintenance through funds that are there for innovation. And yeah, we know this model works because Open Web Docs who was the successor to Mozilla Developer Network, works actually this way, right? When Mozilla decided to no longer invest in the team behind the Mozilla Developer Network, which is a documentation that everyone uses for web development, there was a funding structure that was set up, was money from a bunch of private players, and later the Sovereign Tech Fund as public funding, came together through a fiscal host, the Open Source Collective, used a payroll company, Velocity Global, to essentially hire that team. And that team has been hired and running for like 2 or 3 years at this point, and has been supporting the infrastructure and the technical content of MDN, Open Web Docs. Right? So we know this model works. And I have 7 seconds to recap. So $1 billion is actually not a lot of money. Right? It's really pocket change. We want to separate and shift our mindset around open source innovation, development, and maintenance. And we can shape a much better future if we start thinking about professionalization of maintenance. We still need to figure out how to pay for this. And to have this conversation, we can have this conversation tomorrow here. I think it's at 3 in the debate. And so take your questions then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tobie.